Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We have just this incredible stack of sources dedicated to the best dogs in history.
Mhm.
But this isn't just, a list of cute stories. This is a real historical and sociological exploration.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that. Our source material isn't really focused on everyday loyalty, which is wonderful in its own right. This deep dive is all about the canine heroes, the individuals who left such a profound mark on human history that entire societies felt they had to, stop and memorialize them.
In stone and bronze.
Permanently.
That's really the core of our mission today, isn't it?
Right.
We're looking beyond the famous names everyone knows, Balto, Stubby, Hachiko, and we're analyzing why. Why did they resonate so deeply, and what do these memorials really tell us about the human-dog relationship?
And we have sources that cover everything. We're talking ancient tombs, the trenches of World War I, and even the vacuum of space.
It's an amazing scope.
It is. The sources give us a perfect framework. They trace the philosophical origins of memorializing animals, they highlight the specific, just incredible feats of courage, and then they analyze the lasting cultural tributes.
So for you, the listener, the benefit here is getting comprehensively informed on this. Fast. You're not just getting the facts, you're getting the analysis.
Right.
We're pulling out those surprising details and connecting the dots to show how these tributes reflect this incredibly powerful, enduring bond throughout history.
So one of the most fascinating things right off the bat is that this desire to honor a dog, to publicly celebrate them, it's not a modern thing at all.
Right. It's not some, 20th century sentiment.
Not in the slightest. This reverence is deeply, deeply rooted in human history.
And when you say depth, we're talking about real antiquity here. The sources show that acknowledging a dog as more than just property or a tool goes back thousands of years.
Yes. It's about a deeply established emotional and social bond. To put it in context, just think about the ancient world for a second. Dogs were already indispensable. They were guardians, hunters, partners. But it's how they were treated in death that really signals their elevated status.
Okay, so the example from ancient Egypt in our sources, it's just astonishingly detailed. It highlights that dogs were sometimes buried with their owners.
Right, and not just buried near the family tomb. They were interred right alongside the humans they served.
And the most critical detail,
Yeah.
their names were inscribed on the tombs.
Exactly. And that isn't just a physical act, it's a spiritual acknowledgement. Inscribing a name on a tomb, that signifies that this companion was considered vital, essential, not just in this life, but for the journey into the afterlife.
It elevates the dog from property to a named, legitimate, eternal member of the family. That just shows the dog was seen as having a spirit, an identity worthy of being remembered forever. But as societies evolved, the way we honored them changed, didn't it? It moved from these private, personal tomb inscriptions to something much more public.
That's the crucial evolution. While that deep reverence existed for millennia, the shift to public memorials, statues in city squares or parks, that's a much newer phenomenon. It really takes root in the 19th century.
So why the 19th century? What was going on in society that suddenly made celebrating a dog's heroism a public project instead of just a private act of remembrance?
That's a great question. The 19th century was a period of just massive change. Urbanization, industrialization, and really significantly, the rise of formalized animal welfare movements.
Okay, that makes sense.
As life in cities became more mechanized, more fragmented, there was this cultural need for symbols that represented things like unwavering loyalty, courage, simplicity.
So these public monuments serve two purposes. First, celebrating a specific act by a specific dog. But second, giving the public a shared, tangible symbol of values that might have felt like they were disappearing.
Precisely. The rise of these memorials, which celebrated these extraordinary acts of bravery or service, it coincided with a growing societal conversation about the moral status of animals. These monuments became powerful public statements of gratitude.
And if we look at modern memorials today, they can be anything from a small plaque to a grand city statue. But that central emotional purpose is exactly the same as it was back then. It's all about acknowledging that profound impact.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these tributes are tangible proof that human history is just, incomplete, without acknowledging the unique, often life-saving roles that dogs have played. Whether they were saving lives in the Alps or just providing that constant companionship, these memorials cement their place in our shared story.
So, transitioning from that historical reverence, let's move into concrete heroism on the battlefield. Dogs of war filled these absolutely crucial roles. They were messengers, scouts, sentries, lifesavers. roles that put them directly in the line of fire.
Their service was often silent, but you're right, it was indispensable. They had senses and instincts that humans just don't have, which made them incredibly effective early warning systems, especially in, the horrors of trench warfare.
And this is where it gets really interesting. We have to start with the gold standard of military dogs, Sergeant Stubby.
Stubby's story is just pure chance. He was a stray Boston Terrier mix who literally just wandered onto the Yale University campus where the 102nd Infantry Regiment was training for World War I.
So he wasn't bred for this.
Not at all. He was smuggled overseas and ended up serving in the trenches of France for 18 months.
18 months in the trenches. That's unimaginable for a person, let alone a dog. So what did he actually do that made him so legendary?
Well, his most critical contribution was his ability to detect the faintest trace of poison gas.
A terrifying and indiscriminate killer in that war.
Absolutely. He would run through the trenches, barking and nipping at the soldiers, waking them up long before any human sentry or chemical alarm could register the threat. He saved countless lives just with that one skill.
That's immense. And beyond the gas alarms, the sources also detail his tactical value. He would locate wounded soldiers in no man's land.
A true lifesaver. But the anecdote that really sealed his legend, the one that captured the public's imagination, was when he found a German spy who was mapping the Allied trenches.
Hey, what happened?
Stubby reportedly bit the spy, held him down, and made sure he was captured. He actually earned a promotion to sergeant for it.
A promotion. That detail is key. It wasn't just praise on the battlefield, it was formal military recognition, even if it was a bit unofficial. He met 3 U.S. presidents after the war, and his preserved remains are now on display at the Smithsonian.
Right, the National Museum of American History. That's basically institutionalizing a dog's contribution on a national level. It speaks volumes about the public's need for heroic figures to come out of that terrible war. Stubby was the perfect symbol.
Okay, so moving to World War II, we have another hero, Chips. But his story is more complicated.
It is. Chips was a German Shepherd mix serving with the 3rd Infantry Division. His defining moment came during the invasion of Sicily in 1943. His unit was pinned down by heavy fire from an enemy machine gun nest inside a bunker.
And Chips did the unthinkable.
He broke free from his handler and, under fire, charged the nest. He basically conducted a solo assault on a fortified position and forced the 4 Italian soldiers inside to surrender. He saved his entire unit.
For that. An incredible act of courage, he was initially awarded the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. But, and here's the twist, those awards were later revoked. What did the sources tell us about why?
Well, the revocation wasn't a judgment on Chips's courage. It was a reflection of strict military law that just hadn't evolved to recognize non-human recipients for those specific medals.
So it was a policy issue.
Purely policy. The regulations said those honors were for human soldiers only. His handler was reportedly furious, saying Chips deserved the recognition more than a lot of men.
That is so frustratingly compelling. It raises these big questions about legal and ethical precedents.
It does. But despite the official policy, the cultural memory of Chips is completely intact. His story has been told in books and even a Disney movie.
So the public decided to honor him, even if the military couldn't, officially.
That's right. The cultural recognition became his true, enduring memorial.
Finally, let's talk about the smallest hero in the Pacific, Smokey. A tiny dog with a huge impact.
Smokey was a 4-pound Yorkshire Terrier. She was found abandoned in a foxhole in New Guinea.
Just 4 pounds.
And she spent 2 years in the Pacific Theater, surviving 150 air raids and 12 combat missions. Just her survival alone is a feat of endurance.
But her service went way beyond just enduring. Our source details the surprising and critical engineering contributions she made.
Right, the telegraph wire. She helped engineers build an air base by running a wire through a narrow, 70-foot-long pipe that was only 8 inches wide.
A task that would have been impossible for a human to do quickly.
It would have taken them 3 days of digging up the runway, exposing them to enemy fire. Smokey ran the wire through in minutes. That one act directly advanced the war effort and protected human lives.
And after the war, her service changed. She became one of the earliest recorded therapy dogs.
She did. She visited wounded soldiers in hospitals, providing comfort and boosting morale. A full circle of service.
She's honored with a memorial in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yes. So, What this all means is that these war dog stories really underscore the adaptability and the critical impact dogs had. They weren't just mascots. They were, force multipliers. They solved problems, saved lives, and challenged our very definition of military service.
So if the dogs of war were defined by courage under fire, this next group is all about epic endurance, working against nature, or in one case, just against the finality of loss. We have to start with Balto.
Balto's story is a testament to the sheer physical power and navigational skill of sled dogs. He was a Siberian Husky, the lead dog on the final leg of the 1925 Great Race of Mercy.
Yeah, and let's add some context here for you. This serum run involved 20 different sled dog teams covering 674 miles in just 6 days.
In temperatures that dropped to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Battling blizzards, in the dark. Just an unbelievable journey to deliver life-saving diphtheria serum to Nome, Alaska.
Balto, with his musher Gunnar Kaizen, ran that final 53 miles. And the blizzard was so intense that Kaizen couldn't see his own hand in front of his face.
But Balto stayed on the trail.
He stayed on the trail and delivered the serum just as the stock in Nome was about to run out.
That determination, it saved countless lives. The sheer scale of that event made him famous overnight.
And his legacy is just woven into Alaskan culture now. It inspired the annual Iditarod race, and his monument, the one in New York City Central Park, is iconic.
We noted this earlier, but the statue depicts him mid-stride, doesn't it? It captures that dynamic energy, that urgency.
It's a powerful, tangible link to a moment when canine grit literally changed the course of medical history.
Okay, so next we go back in time to the Swiss Alps in the 19th century for the story of Barry.
Barry was a St. Bernard. He worked at the Great St. Bernard Pass Hospice in the early 1800s, and that environment was just unforgiving. Avalanches, zero visibility, deep snow. This was alpine rescue work at its most raw.
And he worked for a decade. In that time, he's credited with saving over 40 lives.
Over 40 lives. Just think about that number for a moment. 40 people pulled from certain death in the mountains.
The sources always highlight his most famous rescue, finding a young boy, hypothermic and buried in the snow.
He warmed the boy and then carried him to safety on his back. That one story just summarizes his unique blend of strength, instinct, and, you could say, compassion.
And his contributions were so undeniable that when he died, they decided to preserve his body.
They did. He's on display at the Natural History Museum in Bern, Switzerland. There's also a monument to him near the hospice where he worked.
That decision to physically preserve him, it's like with Stubby, it highlights this immense, almost sacred respect they had for his service.
He wasn't just a dog. He was conserved like a historical artifact.
And finally, we turn to the dog whose story is maybe the purest example of loyalty, defined not by action, but by stillness. Hachiko.
Hachiko was an Akita from Japan. And his story is so simple in its premise, but just utterly profound in its impact. After his owner, a professor named Ueno, died suddenly in 1925, Hachiko started waiting at Shibuya Station in Tokyo for him to return from work.
And he kept doing it.
Day after day, for nearly 10 years.
Wow.
His unwavering vigil at the station transformed him from just a grieving pet into a local fixture, and then eventually a national icon.
His story became a global touchpoint. It just transcends language and culture. And that's the core thing to unpack here. How does a simple, passive act of waiting resonate with such staggering power all over the world?
I think it connects to this universal human desire for perfect, unconditional devotion. Hachiko's loyalty represents an ideal loving, a bond that truly doesn't end, not even with death. The statue of him at Shibuya Station today is more than a memorial. It's a living symbol. It's a famous meeting spot, making his quiet fidelity part of the daily story of one of the world's busiest cities.
We're shifting gears a bit now, moving from these grand expeditions and battlefield heroics to dogs whose fame came from either supreme personal fidelity or a much more controversial scientific sacrifice.
Right. This really reveals the full spectrum of how dogs can impact our human stories.
Let's start with Greyfriars Bobby, another classic story of loyalty centered on a gravesite, this time in Scotland.
Bobby was a Skye Terrier in Edinburgh, and after his owner died, he basically performed a vigil very similar to Hachiko's. He guarded his owner's grave at Greyfriars Kirkyard for 14 years.
14 years, until his own death in 1872.
The community eventually took notice, of course. They provided him with food and shelter. His story became this powerful local legend, inspiring books and films. It's an example of how one dog's devotion can literally shape the cultural identity of a historic city.
For sure. His statue is a major landmark near the Kirkyard.
And moving across the Atlantic, we enter the halls of power with Fala. A dog whose companionship actually had political weight.
Fala was President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Scottish Terrier. Now, unlike the working dogs we've been discussing, Fala's role was purely companionship. Yet his visibility made him a national icon during the 1930s and 40s.
Absolutely. During a time of immense global conflict, a Great Depression, Fala's constant presence humanized the presidency. He traveled with FDR, he attended meetings, he was even mentioned in speeches.
He was the perfect, non-controversial symbol of stability and loyalty in a really unstable world.
He became so famous that he was even the subject of a political attack.
The famous Fala speech of 1944, right? Where FDR mocked his opponents for suggesting the dog had been left behind on the Aleutian Islands at taxpayers' expense.
One of the most celebrated political speeches in American history, all centered on a dog.
That really cements his historical importance. It shows his status wasn't just social, it was strategic.
It was. And his legacy is tied directly to Roosevelt's. Fala was buried near FDR, and crucially, a statue of Fala stands alongside Roosevelt in the FDR Memorial in Washington, D.C.
Which is a public acknowledgement of their bond on the national stage.
Exactly.
Finally, we get to what is maybe the most philosophically challenging tribute on our list. Laika, a story of ultimate involuntary sacrifice.
Laika was a stray dog from Moscow. And because of her calm demeanor and resilience, she was selected to become the first living creature to orbit the Earth.
In 1957, aboard Sputnik 2, a monumental leap for the Soviet space program.
A huge technical success. But, as our sources emphasize, the mission was tragically a one-way trip. The technology to bring her back safely just didn't exist yet.
So her sacrifice was predetermined.
It was. It paved the way for human space exploration, but the ethical weight of that decision has always lingered. She was a pioneer, but one whose contribution came at the ultimate cost.
And the honor she received reflects this complexity. There's a statue of her at the Star City Space Facility in Russia. So here's the insight we need. How does the definition of heroism shift when it's an involuntary sacrifice for abstract scientific progress versus, say, Barry actively saving 40 lives?
The shift is dramatic. Her memorial forces us to confront the moral conflict at the heart of discovery. We honor her not for an active choice, but for the inherent risk she represented that allowed us to test the boundaries of human capability. She symbolizes the heavy price of progress. Her memorial is almost a monument to scientific ambition itself.
So the takeaway, integrating all these stories, is really clear. Behind almost every major human achievement, from pioneering space to navigating global conflict, there are dogs. Their contributions, their sacrifices, they're all memorialized for us to see. We've established the who and the why. So now let's turn to the how. It's one thing to celebrate a hero. It's another to immortalize them in a way that truly captures their essence.
Right. This brings us to the actual art and the scope of these memorials.
Because the artistry is a deliberate choice, isn't it? These aren't just records. They're narrative tools.
Exactly. They're designed to freeze a moment of heroism or fidelity. The material, the posture, the location, it all contributes to the dog's lasting legacy.
So if we compare some of the great statues, the differences in style are really informative.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Balto statue in Central Park.
Right. The decision to show him mid-stride, muscles taut, that emphasizes determination, movement, that life-saving urgency.
But then you contrast that with the Hachiko statue at Shibuya Station. It's often shown in a static sitting posture, waiting.
And that static pose emphasizes patience, stoicism, and that unrelenting fidelity. It's a quiet emotional power, not physical force. The choice of bronze conveys permanence in stillness.
These statues are lasting, tangible reminders. The materiality of bronze and stone means they withstand generations, providing a physical touchstone for history that, digital records sometimes lack.
But not all important tributes are these grand bronze statues. Memorialization takes many forms. You have the modest but locally vital plaques and markers. You see them in parks or community spaces.
And those often honor dogs whose impact was much more local, a therapy dog at a hospital, a search and rescue animal who didn't get national fame. They acknowledge the dog's role in the health of that specific community.
Then you have the concept of living memorials, which I find beautiful.
Tributes that are dynamic gardens, trees planted in memory, dedicated park benches.
A living memorial offers a different kind of tribute. It gives you a peaceful, reflective space. It celebrates the life and joy dogs bring by connecting their memory to the cycle of nature.
It's a softer, more continuous form of remembrance.
Right. Now let's revisit a few iconic international examples that show the diversity of these legacies. We've talked about Hachiko. Let's look at a fascinating case where loyalty intersects with commerce. the RCA dog, Nipper.
Nipper, the icon for HMV records. He's unique because he wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. But his image, that terrier listening so intently to a phonograph, became this huge cultural phenomenon.
The statue of him represents a different kind of legacy. It symbolizes loyalty not just to his owner, but loyalty to sound, to quality.
The slogan, his master's voice.
It was one of the most successful advertising campaigns ever. The memorialization here is cultural. It permanently links the image of a dog with faithful attention and quality.
That's a huge insight. The dog's image defines a relationship, the listener to the music making him this immortal corporate and cultural touchstone, even without a heroic act.
And finally, a powerful example of modern community heroism, Chocolo in Medellin, Colombia. This is a statue of a pit bull. And he's celebrated for protecting a group of children in a park from an armed mugging.
Pure local heroism. It shows how monuments are still being erected for these immediate communal acts of protection.
Exactly. It illustrates how different cultures acknowledge dogs contributing to immediate social welfare. So these memorials, from a bustling Tokyo train station to a quiet park in Medellin, all reflect that common human impulse to memorialize extraordinary service. But they define heroism based on the needs of their community.
We've established that these memorials are deeply entrenched in history and culture. So now we have to pull back and ask the ultimate question. What is their lasting impact? Why do these tributes really matter in the 21st century?
Well, they're powerful tools that go way beyond simple remembrance. They matter because they serve three crucial functions. First, they're vital for preserving history.
Right. They ensure that these specific, often surprising stories, the details of the serum run, the specifics of gas warfare, they live on as educational tools for every new generation.
Secondly, they're essential for celebrating the bond. These monuments are physical manifestations of the loyalty, the courage, and the love that define the human-dog relationship. They ground that emotional connection in a tangible piece of history.
And lastly, they're incredibly important for inspiring future generations. They encourage us to look at the dogs in our own lives, not just as pets, but as potential heroes and companions. And that reinforces the care we should give them.
The enduring nature of bronze ensures these legacies persist. However, the ways we memorialize are changing rapidly with technology. The future of tributes is moving beyond physical materials.
We're seeing a massive rise in digital memorials, online platforms, social media, digital archives. They all allow people to share stories and photos.
And this represents a huge shift. It's a move from a singular, permanent location to infinite accessibility. Digital platforms allow for a collective, global remembrance that transcends physical boundaries.
And beyond the digital, we're also seeing the rise of community initiatives, dedicating parks, organizing annual events.
These initiatives operationalize the memorial. They turn remembrance into action and shared experience.
And artists are still finding new ways to do it. Public murals, modern sculptures that capture the spirit of the dogs.
The art continues to evolve to ensure that these legacies inspire us and compel us to reevaluate our relationship with the species.
So after this incredible journey, what does it all mean? It seems like if you look closely at the greatest achievements and most enduring struggles in human history, you'll almost always find dogs. Their contributions, their sacrifices, they're woven into the very fabric of our stories. These monuments, in all their forms, are society's lasting way of saying, we honor the bond, we recognize the service, and we will not let these stories fade.
So we've journeyed through centuries and across continents, exploring the deep respect shown to dogs. We've covered the battlefield heroism of Sergeant Stubby and Chips, the epic rescues of Balto and Barry, the profound fidelity of Hachiko and Greyfriars Bobby, the political weight of Fala, and the ultimate sacrifice made by Laika.
And you, the listener, now have this comprehensive, synthesized understanding of the staggering variety of roles these dogs played, and more importantly, why their legacies are cemented globally in art and story. They aren't just pets, they're genuine historical figures.
And these enduring symbols will continue to ensure that their legacies persist. But here's a final thought. Given the rise of digital memorials and the modern reality of dog cloning, where a hero's physical form or memory can theoretically be perfectly preserved or reproduced, we have to ask a question. Will future generations value the singular physical commemorative statue of a dog hero more or less than the perfectly preserved, cloned, or digitally remembered version? What truly constitutes immortalization when biology and geography are no longer limits? That's something for you to mull over.